So what do we do if we find ourselves in a bad state? What do we do if we find ourselves teetering on the edge or spiraling and we want to get out of this state as quickly as possible? This is undoubtedly the million-dollar question, and it's a huge topic to discuss because for virtually all of you watching, at some point or another, you have found yourself slipping into a negative state or feeling and thinking in ways that you don't want. Perhaps you even find yourself in a bad state right now. Either way, if this is something that you have been struggling with or are struggling with, then definitely stick around to the end of the video because we're going to talk all about how to shift ourselves out of a terrible state so we can get back on track, back into the wish fulfilled to finally manifest what we want. So, you have found yourself in a bad state, an unwanted state of consciousness. What exactly does that mean? That means that for any sort of reason, you are feeling a state of lack or a state of frustration. You may be feeling angry, you may be feeling upset, you may be feeling frustrated or sad. So let's say, for example, you are trying to manifest a specific person and you've been going about your day-to-day using your affirmations or whatever technique that you enjoy and living in the end, and then one morning you wake up and you're feeling pissed or you're feeling really anxious. And all of a sudden you notice that all of these intrusive thoughts are coming in, your heart's starting to pound really fast, perhaps you're starting to think, oh God, this is never going to happen, what am I doing? This is never going to work. Clearly they've moved on. You may notice a lot of intrusive thoughts coming up. You may have old conversations playing out in your mind that remind you of terrible things. It's essentially those moments where we spiral, so to speak, and where we go from feeling really good or even neutral to everything's going to shit, basically. And rest assured, this is something that everybody has done or will do at some point on this journey. And there are many different ways in which we find ourselves reacting in a negative way and spiraling. And when this happens, and I'm going to say when, not if, because again, everybody goes through this, when we find ourselves spiraling or noticing those intrusive thoughts or noticing that shift in how we're feeling, we want to first and foremost not fight it. And this is step number one. Do not try to fight it. And this is where a lot of people are accidentally making things harder for themselves than need be. Because the first instinct that we have, if we start to notice ourselves going in that certain direction and moving more and more into a state that we don't want, we notice these feelings and reactions coming up and all of these thoughts, the first thing that we tend to try to do is like panic and say, oh God, oh no, I'm going to manifest something terrible. I got to get out of this state. I'm freaking out, which is only going to exacerbate the spiral. You're only going to spiral harder the more you panic about the state you're falling into. And I know a lot of people are taught to do things like flip your thoughts, try to talk yourself out of it, or immediately just start going into your affirmations and like putting them on blast. But from my personal experience and many people that I've talked to, this is not an effective way to go about doing this. This is not the most effective way to get yourself out of that state and stop yourself from spiraling further. Because when we try to fight back, when we try to flip all these thoughts, when we try to move ourselves out of that spiral through willpower and try to affirm like crazy, in that moment, the feeling behind those affirmations is going to be fear. It's going to be the state of lack. It's going to be, oh my God, the state, I can't be in this state. But to the I am, to awareness, all that we are bringing into awareness is more emphasis on this terrible state. And this is the biggest thing that I'm noting with people and how they are approaching trying to move out of a state. No amount of conscious willpower or effort is going to get you out of a state. And that really needs to be said because, Lord have mercy, I'm seeing a lot of people doing this. The very first thing that we need to do is not fight it, not let ourselves panic. The more that we struggle and fight, the more that we are putting more emphasis and power and affirmation into the state that is not ideal. We are giving our force and attention and effort to what we don't want. And to have a better understanding of this approach and why it's not a great idea to try to flip thoughts and force yourself out of a state, we need to have a better understanding of the two selves, and you as the operant power, you as awareness versus you as the ego self, or the conception of self. Because we've all heard the term that you are the operant power or that you are God, but a lot of people are failing to understand what exactly this means. And this is one of the most important, if not the most important aspect to all of this. So what exactly is awareness, and what do we mean by I am God? When I talk about awareness, or the I am, that is the greater self, the higher self, so to speak. That is who you truly are underneath all those layers of self. So you, as the greater self, as the bigger self, as awareness or God, you are God living and having this temporary human experience. And we are all this higher power. That's who we actually and truly are. But the catch is, we don't know that, because in this temporary human form, we've effectively fallen asleep. And instead, we identify with the sense of I, or the ego. We have mistakenly assumed that we are this ego self, also known in this community as the concept of self, or self-concept. Literally translated, the word ego is Latin for I, and it is that deeply ingrained psychological sense of self. It is who we think we are. It is what we identify as, who we identify as. It gives us that sense of separation, making us feel uniquely us. And within this personal story is a collection of memories, stories, beliefs, and sensations about who you are, where you came from, what you're good and bad at, what you've experienced, and on and on. Essentially, your ego or self-concept is the sum total of all the beliefs, assumptions, and story that makes you uniquely you. And it is this self-concept, or the beliefs and assumptions specifically, that determine any given state of consciousness that we move into, or the reality that we ultimately experience. Many of you have heard this before, but it is truly important to understand that you are not any of the states that you experience. You are not any of the states that you occupy. None of that is who you truly are. But to the ego self, to that idea of self, or who we think we are so ingrained in that state that we believe we are that state. We have occupied a state of consciousness for so long that we have identified ourselves with that state. With the state of, I'm not chosen, I always get abandoned, I always get rejected, I can never find love, I'm never the one who's chosen, I'm not good enough. But again, we have forgotten that that is not who we truly are. We are not the state of consciousness that we occupy in any given moment, not even the wish fulfilled. And the important thing to understand here is that the ego is just an illusion. It is the false sense of self. And we've all come to believe and identify that we are this ego, that we are this construction of beliefs and assumptions. So to be as clear as possible about the two selves, however you answer the question, who am I, is all the construct of your ego. But again, who you actually are is awareness, and it is the eternal self. That is the greater version of you, the higher self, God or the Father. I and my Father are one, but the Father is greater than I, which ultimately just means that we are not any of the states that we occupy. We are none of the story or experiences that we've had along the way. And this is the first and most important thing to understand if we find ourselves in a bad state, and why we don't want to try to fight that state. Instead, what we want to do, and I guess you can call this step number 2, since number 1 is don't fight it, but step number 2 is to just allow yourself to observe it. Just observe it. And I know that this is going to sound pretty crazy, but if you need to react, if you are having a reaction, let yourself react. Because one of the most destructive things that we can do in this practice, and sadly I see a lot of people do this, and I certainly did this, is we suppress. We are so fearful of our thoughts and our moods and our feeling that we just try to shove it all down, and we just try to flip them away and just ignore it. But this rarely works. This rarely helps, and it is not a recommended route to take, because reactions are subconscious. So it's not like we have conscious control over those anyways. What we do have conscious control over is what we do after the reaction, and that is key, and more on that in a minute. Since creation is finished, we move in and out of states all the time. We are constantly doing this, and we always will continue to do this. Unfortunately, since there are certain states that we have identified with for so long, due to a lot of the beliefs and assumptions that we hold, it is far too easy to find ourselves going back there. So when this happens, we just observe it. Just let it happen. If you need to react, react. You can always come back and revise later. But the more that we try to fight it, the more that we start to panic and say, oh God, I'm in this terrible state and this is just going to manifest terrible things, it's only giving more power and concentration to that unwanted state, which is the opposite of what we want. Trying to shove all our emotions down or shove all the reaction down is only building it up to come out bigger and greater at a later time. So just observe, react if you need to react. Which brings me to step number 3, which is note and remind yourself that you are not the state you occupy. In fact, one of the most common things in the world that we do is find ourselves unintentionally slipping into an undesirable state, which I refer to as ego backlash. Which, by the way, if you want to learn more about ego and ego backlash and I'm going to leave some links down in the description box for some videos to watch so you can have a better understanding of you as the operant power versus the ego self, or that self concept. And guys, this is so important to understand, and why there's so much emphasis on building your trust and your belief in yourself as the operant power. Because inevitably, we're going to find ourselves in a crap state. It's going to happen. That is part of the human experience that we are here for. So we must understand and remind ourselves that we are not any one state of consciousness. And just because we fell into a state that is terrible and it feels like crap and we feel like garbage and perhaps the 3D is in shambles, but ultimately none of that matters, because we always and forever have the ability to move and to change, to get out of any given state, and that nothing that happens in this state, none of the circumstances or incidents or intrusive thoughts define who you really are. So if we are spiraling, if we are reacting, okay, we're reacting, we're observing, and we're taking note of the feedback. Because the other important thing to note about when we spiral and the thoughts that we have and the circumstances around us is it's all feedback into what state we are predominantly occupying or have been occupying. So when we observe and don't try to fight it, we can actually start to understand what may still be alive within us that is causing us to move into this state. If we're having intrusive thoughts that are fear-based, or make us angry, or anything of that sort, it's feedback telling you what we are perhaps still holding on to unknowingly and unintentionally. I made a video not too long ago talking about triggers and how these can actually be incredibly useful to us on our journey and give us some insight as to what beliefs and assumptions we hold that perhaps live underneath the conscious surface and we may not be aware of. I will also leave that video link down below. I've got a ton of videos down there for you guys. You'll definitely want to check them out. As we're observing, as we're paying attention and sort of getting some feedback, and though it may not be ideal, though it may feel like complete crap, the more that we try to fight against it, the more and more that we're only sinking ourselves further into it. It's like quicksand. The more we try to fight our way out of quicksand, the faster we're going to sink. So allow yourself to observe any important feedback as to what you may be identifying with, while at the same time just be reminding yourself and continue to go back to the objective fact that you are not any of the states that you occupy, and that you as awareness, as that greater self, is eternal and everlasting and so much bigger than any one state or circumstance or thought. We do not need to fear our thoughts. We do not need to fear our reactions. We do not need to fear our circumstances. And though this is easier said than done at first, this is something that we want to continue to come back to and continue to prove to ourselves. This is going to naturally make you more objective to any given state of consciousness, and thus easier to detach yourself from. Which brings me to the last point, and that is detachment. And that is just to allow ourselves to get whatever needs to come out, and then focus on just alleviating any anxiety that we're feeling, and perhaps helping ourselves to just calm down first. This is where we introduce things to help ourselves feel better. One idea that I absolutely recommend is breathing exercises. Taking long, slow, deep breaths from the belly so that you can start to begin to relax yourself. And I know that this one may sound kind of cliche, but there's a reason that breathing exercises are so incredibly recommended. And that is because you are physically sending signals to the brain that you are not in danger, which is going to alleviate that anxiety, turn off any fight or flight response that may have been activated, and allow you to start to decompress and come down. It is all too easy when we are fearful to try to force ourselves to jump straight to the wish fulfilled from that spiraling state. And if anybody has tried to do this, you can attest to how challenging this is. So the first thing that we want to do is detach and just allow ourselves to naturally get ourselves in more and more of a relaxed state until we can naturally start to separate ourselves from that state. Focus on getting yourself to a neutral place, or even just feeling okay first and foremost, because trying to blast yourself with affirmations or force a feeling of love and happiness when perhaps we're feeling very fearful and scared and angry is going to be way too much resistance from that spiraling state. So use this time to just help you to feel better. If that means letting yourself react, explode, get it off your chest, let it out, have a good cry, punch a pillow, then okay, do just that. Because we always do feel better after we've sort of released any emotions that perhaps have been bottled. Other than breathing exercises, you can also try things such as going for a walk. You can take a bubble bath. You can turn on some videos that help you to feel good. Turn on your favorite movie or some music that helps to relax you or helps you to feel better. Use a guided meditation to help calm yourself and start to feel more even keel first and foremost. Because once you have let yourself have a moment, once you have reacted, once you've let yourself cry or be mad, and then allow yourself to come down, allow yourself to relax, you can always come back and revise the day later once you are feeling better. And once you are out of that spiraling state, and even in a neutral state, it is going to be easier then to turn your attention back to the wish fulfilled. But genuinely and sincerely, do not be afraid of a spiral or a trigger. These moments happen to all of us. That is just the ego self grasping on to the old familiar story. And inevitably, it does let up. But the more we try to fight it, the more emphasis we're putting on that unwanted state. And that is key. So to recap, if we find ourselves spiraling or we find ourselves in a terrible state and we do not want to stay there, the first thing that we want to do is resist the urge to try to fight it. Do not try to fight it. Do not try to force yourself out of the state. Try not to panic about being in that state or anything like that. Number 2, just observe it. Just observe it and come from as much of an objective place as you can. Number 3, remind yourself that you are not the state of consciousness you occupy. You're never any of the states that you occupy. You are not your circumstances or your beliefs or your thoughts. None of that is who you actually are. Continue to condition and prove to yourself that you are in fact the operant power. And lastly, once you've allowed yourself to react or cry if you need to cry, start letting it out, just start to take some steps to detach from that state and take care of you and whatever you may need in that moment, whether that be breathing exercises, whether that be doing something nice for yourself, whether that be watching something funny or that makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside. Listen to some good music, turn on your favorite podcast. Take your focus and attention to something that is ideal and enjoyable to the best of your ability. And from there, once we have noticed all of those triggers and all of those reactions subside, from that place, once out of that spiral, we can then turn our attention to going back and imagining that state of the wish fulfilled. And the more that you practice this, the more that you begin to separate yourself, your true self, that is awareness, from the ego or the self-concept. And the more and more that you look to the 3D and your thoughts as feedback and not who you really are, the more that you begin to detach from all of the old states of consciousness, the easier and more naturally you will be able to instead move to where you desire to experience in imagination instead. And that is how you ultimately manifest literally anything that you want. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I hope this cleared a few things up. I hope this makes your journey easier. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you are interested in any of my resources, don't forget to check down in the description box for links to my coaching programs, my workshops and courses, my podcast, my blog, my social links. I've got a ton of good stuff down there for you guys, so don't forget to check it out. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on this channel. Don't forget to check out my Manifestation Fundamentals playlist. Each video is a different topic, but they all talk about how to manifest the best life ever. So until we meet again, you guys, as always, please take care, be well, and never forget that you are the operant power. And to God, all things are possible. Happy manifesting, guys.